Please hit record.
Thank you. All right, we got the record going. And as I said, I just need to find a little time to figure out the YouTube page to get that up and running. But these videos all will be posted soon. If anyone needs to see it sooner than that, let me know. I'm happy to share it. Okay, there's a link to the source sheet, and as I said, we'll share it in a second. I am sure that, like me, many of you were shocked and dealing with all sorts of emotions Motzei Shabbos as the news came in first that the election had been declared, at least by most of the news channels and sources, and then right on the tails of that, to get news of the passing of Rabbi Sachs. We knew that he had been sick. I was not under the impression it was such a serious illness or such an imminent demise to him. I think many shared that shock. And it's, he certainly was someone who greatly inspired me and whose Torah I constantly draw on. The only thing that I was a little upset about when he started publishing the Covenant and Conversation, his weekly Dvar Torah on the Parsha, was that he shared it with everyone and not just the rabbis. So I couldn't use that every week for a drasha because too many people saw it in advance. But really, just such fantastic worldview. You know, many people this week are sharing reflections on what exactly is his legacy, what does he mean, and everyone's saying he might not have been the best, the strongest learner, the greatest Talmudist, the greatest halachist, but he just melded everything together in such a beautiful way, in such a way that resonated with the modern world. And equally as important was that he really was an ambassador of Judaism to the broader world, and that not only was his writing accessible to Jews and non-Jews alike, but it was even directed at non-Jews, and he really saw himself as carrying that banner. And really, I'm sure that on Shabbos we'll also speak about him, and some of this might be repeated. But I saw a wonderful story that he spoke at one of the yeshivas in Israel for the post-high school Americans, Anglos, and he was asked about what he thought the future of the modern Orthodox world was. Is there a future for modern Orthodoxy? And I think as the story goes, the question had been asked by one of the rabbis in the yeshiva, and Rabbi Sachs got very upset. Said, I am not a modern Orthodox Jew. I do not consider myself a modern Orthodox Jew. And everyone's sitting there saying, you're the greatest representation of modern Orthodoxy that there is. What are you talking about? And he said, I can't, to call myself a modern Orthodox Jew would be to limit myself to the minority of the minority of the minority. The Jewish people is such a minority in the world, and within Judaism, Orthodoxy is a minority. Within Orthodoxy, modern Orthodoxy is a little nothing. It's a minority within a minority within a minority. And my desire, my intention is to reach the entire world, and to label myself as belonging to any one camp, certainly such a small modern Orthodox limited camp, is not what I'm interested in. He really saw himself as a rabbi for everyone. And so it's in his memory of Yaakov Tzvi ben David Aryeh that we're going to dedicate tonight's learning. We're going to look at 3 ideas of his embedded in this week's Parsha. As I said, all of his writings on the Parsha, there's many books that have been published, but they're all available for free on the website rabbisachs.org, as are many of his recordings, videos, other writings, his books. Any book of his is a real treat to read. Not only because of the British accent that we can hear, or if you're watching the video, listening to, but really a great interpreter of Judaism in our age, and one whose writings and Torah will continue to benefit from for many generations to come, I'm sure. Gesundheit. With that in mind, let me pull up the source sheet for tonight. And Let me zoom in so everyone can see what we're looking at. All right. So the first two ideas we'll call very, sort of on the more personal side. And then the final idea is a more universalistic idea. And all speak to Rabbi Sachs and the Torah that he taught and what he represented. As always, please, if any questions or thoughts, please make yourself known. Feel free to interrupt, and we're happy to have exchange and feedback as well. So the first idea I labeled leadership and trust in the future. He has a book called Future Tense, which is a great book. I should give a plug for anytime someone meets with me looking, someone not connected with their Jewish tradition, someone looking to convert to Judaism, someone looking to learn about the basics. My first recommendation is always Rabbi Sachs's book, A Letter in the Scroll. It's a book that inspired me when I first read it. And it's really, as I said, everything we said about him is really a great articulation of Judaism and the outlook and the significance of orthodoxy for a contemporary reader in the 20th, 21st century. And so this is one of the major themes that comes up, certainly in his treatment of the Parsha and in his writings in general. His analysis begins with the very opening of the Parsha. I only gave the first few psukim, but the entire first scene of the Parsha tells us of Sarah's death. Chayei Sarah, me'ah shana v'esrim shana v'sheva shanim shnei Chayei Sarah. Sarah lived to be 127 years old. V'tamat Sarah b'kiryat arba hi Chevron be'eretz Canaan. She dies in Chevron. Abraham comes to eulogize her and to cry for her. Vayakom Avraham me'al pnei meito, vayidaber el b'nei chetz lemor. So after the initial shock and expression of emotion, Avraham rises from before the dead, and he goes to this family, this clan, the B'nai Chetz, and he begins negotiating to buy a burial plot for Sarah. And first they say, you're a representative of God, you can bury, we'll give you land, you don't need to buy it. He insists on buying it. Okay, 400 shekel, what's that between friends? And he engaged, but he's very insistent on buying the land. This purchase is so significant, Rabbi Sachs notes. First of all, the Torah records it in such detail. Could have just told us that Avram bought a burial plot from this family in Hebron and be done with it, and the story would have continued. But the Torah concerns itself with all the details of the purchase. And then the purchase is referenced twice more in Sefer Breshit. So one example is as Yaakov is dying in Egypt, and he is asking his children to bury him back in the family burial plot in Canaan. We read in source number 2, Vayitzavotam vayomer alehem, Ani ne'esaf el ami, kivu oti el avotai el ha'ma'ara asher b'stei Ephron hachiti. I am going to die. Please bury me in the cave of Ephron hachiti, in his field. Ba'me'ara asher b'stei ha'machpelah, in the cave that is in this machpelah field. Asher al pnei mamrei be'eretz Canaan, gives the exact location. Asher kana Avraham et hasadeh me'it Ephron hachiti lahu zakaver, which Abraham purchased from Ephron as an eternal burial plot, as a family burial plot. Shama kavu et Avraham et Sarah ishto, Shama kavu et Yitzchak et Rivka ishto, v'Shama kavarti et Leah. That's where all my ancestors are buried, Avraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. Oh, well, not Yaakov yet, but Yaakov soon to be with Leah. So why does the Torah go into such detail and emphasis on the purchase of this land? And then a second detail, it's not really a detail, it's the remainder of the Parsha essentially, is about the Abraham's servants being sent to find an appropriate wife for Yitzchak. And this is noted by many as being the longest narrative detail in all of Tanakh. For 63 psukim, we read about this, the trip, the journey down, the conversation, the oath, the promise he makes to God before he meets Rivka, then the repetition of the conversation as he returns and tells the family of what happened, right? Why is there so much detail, right? So we don't need to read it all on the inside, but just to remind us, right? Avram Zakin Baba Yamim, Hashem Berachat Avraham Bakol, Avraham is old. Vayomer Avraham el avdo zakin beito hamoshel b'chol asher lo simna yadcha tachat yorechi. He makes his servant take an oath, and I will make you swear to Hashem that you will not find a wife for my son from the Canaanite women, but rather go back to my family and find him a wife from there. And that begins the what seems to be painstaking detail in the journey down, and then the encounter with Rivka at the well, and eventually convincing the family to allow her to come back with him, and the beautiful scene in the field as Yitzchak, we're told, is davening mincha and sees Rivka riding on the camels from afar. She falls off the camel, she covers herself. Right, one of the more romantic scenes that we have in Sefer Breshit for sure, not in all of Tanakh. And so not new questions and not even new answers, but just the way that Rabbi Sachs approaches it, I think is unique to him. So he begins by asking the question that so many ask, which is, why does the Torah go into so much detail in these two episodes? Why in this parsha in particular, right, are we given all the details, right? Every conversation, every word that was said. Sorry, I forgot to go down to the next source. And as he writes, the explanation is simple and unexpected. Throughout the story of Abraham and Sarah, God had promised them two things: children and a land. The promise of land is repeated no less than 7 times. The promise of children occurs 4 times. Abraham's descendants will be a great nation, as many as the dust of the earth and the stars in the sky. He will be the father not of one nation, but of many. Despite this, when Sarah dies, Abraham has not a single inch of the land that he called his own. He has only one child who will continue the covenant, Isaac, currently unmarried. Neither promise has been fulfilled. Hence, the extraordinary detail of the 2 main stories in Chayei Sarah, the purchase of land and the finding of a wife for Isaac. There's a moral here, and the Torah slows down the speed of the narrative so that we will not miss the point. What is the point, according to Rabbi Sachs, of the Torah emphasizing Abraham's purchase of land and finding a wife for Yitzchak? Number 1, God promises, but we have to act. God promised Abraham the land, but he had to buy the field first. He had to buy the first field. God promised Abraham many descendants, but Abraham had to ensure that his son was married, and to a woman who would share the life of the covenant, so that Abraham would have, as we say today, Jewish grandchildren. Despite all the promises, God does not and will not do it alone. By the very act of self-limitation, tzimtzum, through which he creates the space for human freedom, he gives us responsibility. And only by exercising it do we reach our full stature as human beings. God saved Noah from the flood, but Noah had to make the ark. He gave the land of Israel to the people of Israel, but they had to fight the battles. God gives us the strength to act, but we have to do the deed. What changes the world, what fulfills our destiny, is not what God does for us, but what we do for God. And now he transitions to a theme that he talks about many, many, many times, which is leadership. This is what leaders understand, and it is what made Abraham the first Jewish leader. Leaders take responsibility for creating the conditions through which God's purposes can be fulfilled. They are not passive but active, even in old age like Abraham in this week's Parsha. Indeed, in the next chapter, to our surprise, we read that after Sarah's death, Abraham takes another wife and has 8 more children. Whatever else this tells us, there are many interpretations. It certainly conveys the point that Abraham stayed young the way Moshe stayed young, his eyes undimmed and his natural energy unabated. Though action takes energy, it gives us energy. The contrast between Noah in old age and Abraham in old age could not be greater. Perhaps, though, the most important point is that large promises, a land, countless children, become real through small beginnings. Leaders begin with an envisioned future, but they also know that there is a long journey between here and there. We can only reach it one act at a time, one day at a time. So just a beautiful way of tying this whole thing together, right? And again, he's not the first to suggest this as the answer to our questions, but the way in which he brings together the underlying message, right? The parshanut about why the Torah has to go into the details that it goes in, and applying it to our reality in a way that resonates not only for the Jewish leader, but for the Jewish Baal Habayit, right? The husband, the wife, the man, the woman, reading on their own and saying, this is something that makes sense to me. This is something that inspires me, hopefully, and that can have an impact on my relationship to Torah, to the world, and to Judaism. And that's something which Rabbi Sachs was masterful at doing over and over and over again. As a connected piece, it's interesting to look in a way that I haven't really done previously, to really go year by year in his writings on each parsha and to see which themes he picks up on from year to year, which quotes he uses again. You can really see the development, much like if anyone learns the Sfat Emet is the best example of this, but really any Hasidic work where the teachings are recorded chronologically, right? If you want to look up what the Sfat Emet has to say in a certain pasuk, you have to flip from year to year to see what he says. And the idea is partially that the Hasidim thought that the Rebbe had some sort of Ruach HaKodesh or semblance of Nevi'us, of prophecy, so they didn't want to mess with the way that things were revealed. But it would be an interesting endeavor to take a work like the Sfat Emet, like Chassidut, like any of the Hasidic Rebbe's, and see, take it topically rather than take it chronologically, and see how the idea develops and ties in. So with Rabbi Sachs also, a lot of ideas repeat from year to year. So he, in a different year, in 5773, tackled the same question, but as we said, one of his main themes was the Jewish future and Jewish continuity. I thought what he said here was just so powerful and so beautiful. So he again says that the focus and the reason the Torah had to emphasize the purchase of the land and the finding of the wife is that the two promises that God made to Avram and Sarah were land and children, right? So as Rabbi Sachs picks up, land, Israel, children, Jewish continuity. The astonishing fact is that today, 4,000 years later, they remain the dominant concern of Jews throughout the world. The safety and security of Israel as the Jewish home, and the future of the Jewish people. Abraham's hopes and fears are ours. Is there any other people, right, he says parenthetically, I wonder, whose concerns today are what they were 4 millennia ago? The identity through time is awe-inspiring. Now as then, the divine promise does not mean that we can leave the future to God. That idea has no place in the imaginative world of the first book of the Torah. To the contrary, the covenant is God's challenge to us, not ours to God. The meaning of the events of Chayei is that Abraham realized that God was depending on him. Faith does not mean passivity. It means the courage to act and never to be deterred. The future will happen, but it is we, inspired, empowered, given strength by the promise, who must bring it about. Right? So to say that Jewish continuity, that the focus is the very same concerns that dominate the Jewish community in 5773 would have been 2013, 2012, I guess, before the change of the year, right? That 7 years ago, right, the very same concerns that were the central focus of Abraham and Sarah, the first Jewish family, remain the central focus for the Jewish world and Jewish families in our day and age. Again, just the way that he ties that together, because any society is going to be concerned with having a place to live and having children, having continuity, but just the way that he packaged it, I thought was a very powerful supplement to the main idea that we had seen, what we call the Jewish future. Any thoughts or questions on this first idea? All right, so we'll move on to number 2, the Jewish mission. So for the Next idea he picks up at the very beginning of the parsha, the pasuk that we saw already, the first pasuk in the parsha, where we're told that Sarah died at the age of 127, but the way the Torah says it is, Vayu Chayei Sarah Mea Shana, the life of Sarah was 100 years, Ve'esrim Shana, and 20 years, Ve'sheva Shani, in 7 years. So everyone, right, wants to know why the Torah says it in this way. Why can't it just say 127 years? What does it mean 100 years, 20 years, 7 years? So the most famous answer to this is brought by Rashi. Why does it say shana, years, after each number? Each number is learned out, has its own significance. Bat kuf kibat kaf lachet. When she was 100, she was like a 20-year-old when it came to sin. There's one position in the Talmud that says that it's really at the age of 20 that a person can begin to fully sin, to be responsible for their actions. So when she was 100, she was like a 20-year-old. She was free of sin. So just like a 20-year-old doesn't sin, was not punished for their sins, Sarah, when she was 100, she was like someone without any sins. Ubat kaf kivat sheva leyofi. When she was 20, she was like a 7-year-old when it came to beauty. Right? So we can ask what exactly does it mean like a 7-year-old. We don't think of 7-year-olds as being beautiful in the same way that I think Rashi meant to convey. At least I hope we don't. But that she was beautiful, right? That she was her beauty was ageless. And so Rashi tells us that each year, each stage in her life was equal and equivalent. And then we see a similar thing by Avraham, right? Or we'll get there in a second. But with Avraham, we see twice in the parsha. Number one, after he successfully purchases the field and the cave and he buries Sarah, the very next thing we read is Avraham zaken ba bayamim, v'Hashem beirach et Avraham ba'kol. Avraham was old, advanced in years, and the Lord blessed Abraham in all things. And then when Avraham dies, later in the parsha, we read, Eli yemei chayei Avraham asher chaya me'at shana v'shivim shana v'chamesh shanim. Avraham lived to be 175. Vayikra vayimat Avraham b'seva tova zaken v'saveya vaye'asef el amav. Abraham died, his last breath, dying at a good, ripe old age, old and contented. He was gathered to his kin. So Rabbi Sachs asked, we have a Rashi that tells us that Sarah was, all her years were equally good, right? When she was 100, she was like 20. When she was 20, she was like 7, right? All her years were equally good. So as we look at Sarah's life, that's a blatantly false claim. Right? Sarah suffered greatly in her life. She was taken hostage by 2 separate kings. She was almost forced into marriage. She had to suffer the pain, the humiliation of, for so many years, not being able to have children with Avraham, of seeing Hagar and Avraham have a child together, then seeing Ishmael perhaps be favored by Avraham, expelling Ishmael, right? Never lived to see Yitzchak get married. Right? She did not have an easy life. So how could Rashi tell us that all of her years were equally good? Clearly there was some pain and some suffering in her life. And with Avraham also, right? We've already discussed that the 2 major promises that Hashem had made to Avraham had not been fulfilled at this point in his life, when the Torah tells us that Hashem berach Avraham b'kol, that God blessed Avraham with everything. So how can the Torah say that Avraham had been blessed with everything? How can the Torah say that Avraham died old and content and satisfied, right? He also had difficult episodes in his life, right? The trauma of Akedat Yitzchak is just the most obvious and the most glaring, but he also had trying times. You know that Hashem tested Avraham 10 separate times. So how can the Torah make these claims? Right? How then can we say that he was satisfied? And so to answer this, Rabbi Sachs, right before he was Rabbi Sachs, he was Dr. Sachs, and he has a PhD in philosophy, so he often quotes from the academic philosophical world. So he quotes Nietzsche, who says, he who has a why in life can bear almost any how. He who has a why in life can bear almost any how. So Rabbi Sachs, building off this, says that Avraham and Sarah were among the supreme examples in all of history of what it is to have a why in life, right? Avraham and Sarah, their entire mission, their entire career is a response to the call, to God's call to them, right? We explored this a couple of weeks ago in Parshat Lech Lecha. Why did God choose Avraham? But clearly they're on a mission, and everything they do is in response and in connection to the mission that God has given them, right? So they have the greatest why of anyone in history. That's the claim. So Rabbi Sachs, building on this, says, when Rashi says that all of Sarah's years were equally good, he is attributing to her what the biblical text attributes to Avraham, namely a serenity in the face of death that came from profound tranquility in the face of life. Avraham knew that everything that happened to him, even the bad things, were part of the journey on which God had sent him. And Sarah had sent him and Sarah. He had the faith to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, fearing no evil, knowing that God was with him. This is what Nietzsche calls the strong heart. Right? Rabbi Sachs's point here is that Avraham and Sarah didn't see the bad in their life. They didn't see the bad as bad because they were so focused on the mission and so focused on living the way that God had instructed them to live and spreading the word of God to the rest of the world, right? Whether it's monotheism, morality, right? Whatever exactly the message is, and in different places we see a different emphasis, that they didn't experience any of the bad, any of what we would call pain and suffering as pain and suffering, because they were laser focused on the mission that they were on. So therefore, they were content and happy. That's what Rabbi Sachs says, right? And then building on this idea in other years, he talks often in the context of Chayei Sarah about the faith and the perseverance and the strength of survivors of the Shoah, of Holocaust survivors. And it goes over and over again, but just one example, I'm reading now from 5776, from 5 years ago. It is the background of these two stories that help us understand Avraham after the death of Sarah. He set the precedent. First, build the future, and only then can you mourn the past. If you reverse the order, you will be held captive by the past. You'll be unable to move on. You'll become like Lot's wife. Something of this deep truth drove the work of one of the most remarkable survivors of the Holocaust, psychotherapist Viktor Frankl. Frankl lived through Auschwitz, dedicating himself to giving other prisoners the will to live. He tells the story in several books, most famously in Man's Search for Meaning. He did this by finding for each of them a task that was calling to them, something they had not yet done, but that only they could do. In effect, he gave them a future. This allowed them to survive the present and turn their minds away from the past. So just as Avram and Sarah didn't experience the bad, the pain, the suffering in their life as bad, because they were so focused on the mission and on realizing it and on the future and the future promises, says that was the secret of survival of the Holocaust survivors as well. And he says, right, that's why growing up, no one ever talked about their experiences in the camps. He said only once they were confident that they had built a secure family, they had ensured financial success for themselves in England, in Rabbi Sachs's case, in America too, right? Only at an older age, when they felt a bit more secure, would they allow themselves to look back and try to process what they had been through. So very, very interesting insights into human psychology. And it echoes with something personal for Rabbi Sachs's life as well. When he retired from being chief rabbi of England, of the United Kingdom, he gave an interview to Yair Rosenberg in Tablet magazine. And in it, he revealed, right, nothing that was a secret, but nothing that Rabbi Sachs spoke about, and we'll see about in a second, that he actually had been through 2 previous bouts of cancer. Right? At the time, it wasn't 2 previous. There was not a third at the time of the interview. But now we can see that he has succumbed to his 3rd bout with cancer. And so Yair Rosenberg asked him, why is it that you don't write about it? You know, so many people that have suffered through illness write about how powerful that was on their life and the transformative impact it has if they're able to recover and to survive, and what that means. And so Rabbi Sachs says that he doesn't focus on his he didn't focus on his cancer because of what he saw his father go through. His father was not afflicted with cancer, but he had hip replacement. He went through a lot of illness as well. And right, so he says, I saw my father in his late 80s go through 4 or 5 major operations. This was not cancer, it was hip replacements and those things. When you have operations in your 80s, they sap your strength. He got weaker and weaker as the decade passed. He was walking on crutches at my induction. He was alive for my induction, and that was very important to me. Now, my late father, alav hashalom, didn't have much Jewish education, but he had enormous emunah, faith. I used to watch him saying Tehillim in the hospital, and I could see him getting stronger. It seemed to me that his mental attitude was, I'm leaving this to Hashem. If he sees that it's time for me to go, then it's time for me to go. If he still needs me to do things here, he'll look after me. I adopted exactly that attitude. So on both occasions I felt, if this is the time Hashem needs me up there, thank you very much indeed for my time down here. I've enjoyed every day and feel very blessed. He wants me to stay and there's still work for me to do, and he's going to be part of the refuah. And I put my trust in him. So there was no test of faith at any point. Just these simple moments at which I say, Yado avkid ruchi, in his hand I place my soul. That was my thought. Since we say that every day in Adon Olam, I didn't feel the need to write a book about it. It was for me not a theological dilemma at all. I had faith, said Sachs. So right, very much echoing what he says about Abraham and Sarah, right? That he was always looking to the future, always looking to what was next, what was part of his mission, and not allowing himself to be caught in history or in previous experiences was part of his, I guess, his secret to survival of overcoming 2 bouts of cancer. And unfortunately for all of Klal Yisrael, for the entire world, he did not survive the 3rd bout. Okay, the final idea we're going to explore tonight is what we would call a more universal or global perspective or theme. And this is a quote that he references several times in his writings on this week's Parsha, I have to assume, and elsewhere as well. But he begins this essay from 5779, just from 2 years ago. It's a theme that he wrote about a few times on Chayei Sarah. To quote from Eric Arbach's famous past, the Torah is fraught with background. Behind the events that are openly told are shadowy stories left for us to decipher. Hidden beneath the surface of Parshat Chayei Sarah, for example, is another story alluded to only as a series of hints. There are 3 clues in the text. And this is something that Rabbi Sachs does beautifully, because he's such a great writer and speaker, is to really unravel some of the mysteries of the Torah in ways that, once it's done, is obvious, in the same way that many great teachers do. And so he brings out a theme that, once we see it, is quite readily apparent. So his first clue that he points to in the Torah is the very end of chapter 24, as Rivka is being brought back to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak is davening mincha, is davening in the field, awaiting the return of the servant with his future wife. We're told, "V'Yitzchak ba mibo be'er lachai ro'i, v'yoshev be'eretz hanegev." Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Be'er Lachai Ro'i, for he was settled in the region of the Negev. So question number 1, or curious detail number 1, is why was Yitzchak, why was he in Be'er Lachai Ro'i? Why was he at this well? And why do we care? Why does the Torah feel it necessary to tell us that this is where Yitzchak was at the time? Of what significance? It seems to be totally irrelevant to the story at hand. So that's curious detail number 1. Curious detail number 2. immediately after Yitzchak marries Rivka. The Torah tells us at the beginning of Perek Kafhei, chapter 25, Vayosef Avraham vayikach isha ushma Keturah. Avraham marries again. He marries a woman named Keturah, and they have many children together. I think it was 8 children we saw previously. So why does the Torah, why? Right? Again, Avraham at this point, he's acquired land, he's seen Yitzchak get married, right? So he's seemingly accomplished what it is that he needed to accomplish or to fulfill God's promises. We presume that the love of his life was Sarah, so why does he marry again? And why does the Torah tell us that he married again? Curious detail number 2. Curious detail number 3. This one maybe not as curious, but interesting detail number 3 is when Avraham dies, a few psukim later, Vayigva, Vayamat Avraham Beseva Tova Zaken Vesaveya Vayasef Elamav, as we already saw that Avraham dies at a good ripe age, old and contented. He was gathered to his kin. Like Beruoto Yitzchak v'Yishmael Banav El Me'arat Machpelah El Ste'efron Ben Sochar Hachiti Asher Al Pnei Mamrei. Isaac and Yishmael bury Avraham together. Okay, so not insignificant, not a curious detail, but a detail that needs more explanation. Because the last we saw, Avraham had kicked Yishmael out of the house, right? Why would Yishmael, what is it, how is it that Yishmael was able to come and bury Avraham together with Yitzchak seemingly on good terms? Right, the last we saw, these 2 children did not get along together. They were never told of any reconciliation. So those are the 3 details. Number 1, why is Yitzchak coming from the Be'er Lachai Ro'i right before davening Mincha and meeting Rivka, and why does the Torah tell us about it? Number 2, why does Avraham marry so late in life, and why are we concerned about that? And number 3, what is it that allowed Yishmael to participate fully in the burial of Avraham, his father? So to answer this, Rabbi Sachs turns to the Midrashic tradition, and we'll see 2 sources. The first is Rashi's summary of the Midrash of Breshit Rabbah, commenting on the fact that Yitzchak came from Be'er Lachai Ro'i. Rashi tells us, Mi bo Be'er Lachai Ro'i, Shalach lahavi Hagar la'Avraham aviv she'yisa'ena. Yitzchak was in Be'er Lachai Ro'i. It's not the first time we see this place, Be'er Lachai Ro'i. Hagar named the place Be'er Lachai Ro'i the first time she was kicked out of Avraham's home. So this place is associated with Hagar. So in telling us that Yitzchak was in Be'er Lachai Ro'i, the Torah is telling us, according to this Midrash, that Yitzchak was seeking out Hagar. He was seeking out Hagar to try to force Avraham to make up with her. And there is, in fact, a tradition that Keturah, the second wife of Avraham, is in fact Hagar. That Avraham, when he remarries, wasn't marrying anyone. He was taking Hagar back, and that there was reconciliation between the 2 of them. Okay, so that's the first midrashic tradition, the first story in the midrash to fill in some of the details. And the second is quite fascinating. This is from Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. We'll just look in the English. So it picks up talking about Yishmael after he was kicked out of Avram's home, and after Hagar was afraid that he was going to die of thirst and starvation. A well appears, he's saved, and Yishmael marries. Yishmael sent for a wife from among the daughters of Moab, and Ayesha was her name. After 3 years, Avraham went to see Ishmael his son, having sworn to Sarah he would not descend from the camel in the place where Ishmael dwelt. Avraham is curious to see what happened with Ishmael. He arrived there at midday and found there the wife of Ishmael. He said to her, "Where is Ishmael?" She said, "He has gone with his mother to fetch the fruits of the palms from the wilderness." So Avraham says to the wife, his daughter-in-law, he said to her, "Give me a little bread and a little water, for my soul is faint after the journey in the desert." She said to him, I have neither bread nor water. He said to her, when Yishmael comes home, tell him this story, and say to him, a certain old man came from the land of Canaan to see you. He said, exchange the threshold of your house, for it is not good for you. When Yishmael came home, his wife told him the story. A son of a wise man is like half a wise man. Yishmael understood. His mother sent and took for him a wife from her father's house, and her name was Fatima. Okay, so based on this interaction, Yishmael understands that it was Avraham who came to visit him, and Avraham did not approve of his first wife. Yishmael still felt something for Avraham, even though Avraham had kicked him out. And so Yishmael heeds Avraham's advice, and he divorces, gets rid of the first wife, takes a second wife, Fatima, right? Those with any familiarity with Islam know that Fatima is the mother of Muhammad, right? So significance there. Again, after 3 years, Avraham went to see Ishmael, having sworn to Sarah as on the first occasion, he would not descend from the camel. He came there at midday, and he found there Yishmael's wife. He said to her, where's Yishmael? She said, he has gone with his mother to feed the camels in the desert. He said, give me a little bread and water. My soul is faint. She fetched it and gave it to him. Avraham arose and prayed before the Holy One, blessed be he, for his son, and thereupon Yishmael's house was filled with all good things of various blessings. When Yishmael came home, his wife told him what had happened. Yishmael knew that his father's love was still extended to him. As it is said, like a father pities his son. After the death of Sarah, Avram again took Hagar, his divorced wife, as it is said, and Avram again took a wife, her name was Keturah. Why does it say again? Because on the first occasion, she was his wife, and he again betook himself to her. Her name was Keturah because she was perfumed with all kinds of scents. Okay, so the Midrash is telling us that Avraham had a reconciliation with Yishmael and Hagar, right? So that answers all of our questions. Why did Yitzchak go to Be'er Lachai Roi, and why does the Torah care about that? He went because that's the place associated with Hagar. And he wanted to help Avraham make amends with Hagar, right? Maybe Yitzchak had grown up and seen that maybe he had played a role in or had some responsibility for Hagar and Yishmael having been expelled from the home. He wants to make up for it, so he helps to bring about this reconciliation. Avraham clearly still cared about Yishmael, and Yishmael still cared about Avraham. And so, why does Avraham remarry? He remarries because it's not stam remarrying, but it's taking Hagar back to show that there's been a full amends. Why is Ishmael at the funeral of Avraham? Because, as we see, they've made peace. They've made up. And so Rabbi Sachs takes this midrashic tradition, takes this what he calls an underlying story, or this alluded to story, in the background of the parsha, and applies it very powerfully to the need for better relations between Jews and Islam and Muslims in our day, right? The hidden story. The hidden story of Chayei Sarah has immense consequence for our time. Jews and Muslims both trace their descent from Avraham. Jews through Isaac, Muslims through Yishmael. The fact that both sons stood together at their father's funeral tells us that they too were reunited. Beneath the surface of the narrative in Chayei Sarah, the sages read the clues and piece together a moving story of reconciliation between Avraham and Hagar on the one hand, Yitzchak and Yishmael on the other. Yet there was conflict and separation. Yes, there was conflict and separation. But that was the beginning, not the end. Between Judaism and Islam, there can be friendship and mutual respect. Avraham loved both his sons and was laid to rest by both. There is hope for the future in this story of the past. Right, so harking back to what we saw at the beginning, right, that looking forward toward the future, right, that because Rabbi Sachs, right, tells us that the mission, the lesson of Avraham is to be focused on the mission, to be focused on the future and bringing about the realization of the mission that we're on. That's how we're supposed to look at the past, right? So there's a redemption of the past, of the bad ties, the bad fallout between Avraham and Hagar, Yitzchak and Ishmael, and that, he says, should be our inspiration. And certainly that's something that Rabbi Sachs did very powerfully as someone who cared deeply about about representing and engaging Judaism with the broader world, right? The broader religious world, the broader secular world, being an authentic voice, something that he did very powerfully and perhaps that he did very uniquely among Jewish leaders in our day and age. It's a great contribution that he made. So those are three ideas of Rabbi Sachs from the Parsha. As I said, the website is readily available. I highly encourage, for this week, for future weeks, anyone looking for any inspiration, for any unique and fresh takes on the Parsha, Rabbi Sachs certainly offers it. Another thing that he was masterful at was bringing stories, and stories from unexpected sources and really tying things together in a very powerful way is another thing that he was masterful at. He is a tremendous, tremendous voice of inspiration for our generation, and he's a voice that we desperately need and will continue to need. Even as he's no longer with us, thankfully we have a plethora of his writing, his teachings to continue to inspire and to teach us. So Yehi Zichro Baruch, may his memory be for a blessing. May we continue to learn from him and be inspired from him, and may that be a merit for him and his family as we continue to mourn the loss. Laila Tov, everybody. Have a good night. We will meet again next Tuesday evening. I get a lot of emails from people asking for the link. It's the same link every week. I put it in the emails, but it doesn't change from week to week. So if you want to bookmark it or put it in your calendar, it's not going to change week to week. That's just a little helpful piece of advice. But feel free to download the source sheet. As I said, the recordings will be posted on YouTube as soon as I find the time to organize the page properly and upload them all. Hopefully in the next week or so, we'll have that taken care of. And may we continue to be inspired from Rabbi Sachs and from all his wonderful teachings.
Thank you, Rabbi, for an inspiring share.
Yeah, that was very, very good.
Laila Tov, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
That was